The movie opens with a sobering text explaining the situation in Somalia in 1992. Years of warfare among rival clans has led to a famine on a biblical scale, causing the deaths of 300,000 civilians. The footage is heart-wrenching, showing the tragic suffering of the Somali people. In the midst of this chaos, Mohammed Farah Aidid emerges as the most powerful warlord in Somalia. He uses hunger as a weapon, seizing international food shipments at the ports, causing even more people to suffer, including his own. The world responds, and a force of 20,000 US Marines are sent to deliver food and restore order. However, Aidid declares war on the remaining UN peacekeepers a year later in April, after waiting for the Marines to withdraw. In June, his forces ambush and slaughter 24 Pakistani soldiers and then begin targeting American personnel. In late of August, American elite soldiers are sent to Mogadishu to remove Aidid and restore order. The mission was supposed to take 3 weeks, but 6 weeks have passed with no total mission accomplishment, and Washington is growing impatient. The scene then shifts to Saturday, October 1993. A helicopter is hovering over the Red Cross food distribution center in Mogadishu as a food truck arrives and people desperately try to fetch the supplies. Aidid's army patrol arrives and starts firing on civilians, claiming the food as Aidid's property. The personnel on the helicopter want to engage, but are told to return to the base over the radio as the UN jurisdiction doesn't allow them to intervene. In the next scene, American soldiers under General Garrison intervene and bring Mr. Otto, a local businessman, to the general, who suspects him of selling weapons to Aidid's militia and being Aidid's right hand. The two chat, and Mr. Otto tells the general to leave the country as it's their civil war and not America's. The general assures him that they won't leave before catching Aidid. He pronounces the war as genocide rather than a civil war as he departs, leaving Otto in custody. Then the scene shifts to the US military base, and from sources in the streets, the American soldiers are informed that the Bakara Market, Aidid's militia stronghold, a meeting of Aidid's senior cabinet is about to take place. The military personnel get oriented about the mission's template. Assault Force Delta will infiltrate the target building, Security Force Rangers will hold a 4-center perimeter around the target's building, with Lieutenant McKnight leading the evacuation. The aim of the mission is to capture 2 top-tier personnel, Omar Salad, Aidid's top political advisor, and Abdi Hassan, Aidid's interior minister, who are anticipated to be at this meeting. Sergeant Eversmann, the chalk leader of the Rangers, cheers up the Rangers team as they start to gear up for their mission. The soldiers take turns calling their families before heading out. As the mission awaits to begin, Abdi, a Somali spy working for the Americans, is given the task of parking his car in front of the building where Aidid's senior cabinet meeting is expected to take place. However, he hesitates to park exactly in front of the building out of fear of being noticed and shot by Aidid's militia. This action angers the American generals, and they eventually force him to park where he was supposed to. With the exact location of the building now known, the code for the start of the mission is Irene. And the code gets announced, and the team leaves the camp and the mission starts. As the helicopters fly by, a young boy who seems to be spying for Aidid's militia notices the movements of the American camp and radios to inform them. The Americans lose their surprise factor as Aidid's militia begins to prepare themselves. They burn tires to alert all the militias of the Americans' anticipated arrival, and when they arrive at the location, the Assault Force Delta infiltrates the building as the Rangers surround the building to secure the perimeter. As the Rangers rope down from their helicopters, an RPG fires at them, and the helicopter maneuvers to avoid the RPG, and one of the Rangers, Blackburn, misses the rope and falls down. As the shooting starts and chaos ensues, the Rangers get a stretcher to carry Blackburn to their Humvees. Sergeant Strucker leads the Humvees, and Colonel Steele orders the evac to send out 3 Humvees with the casualty Blackburn. Tragically, Sergeant Pila gets shot and dies while operating the machine gun of the Humvees, driving the casualty away. Meanwhile, the Assault Force Delta successfully secures the target building, collects the target personnel, and prepares for evac. While providing cover fire, however, the Black Hawk helicopter gets shot down by an RPG, and the generals in the control center order the ground forces and the choppers to form a secure perimeter around the crash site and check for survivors quickly. And they do this because they're afraid of the city's inhabitants going after the crashed Black Hawk. Sergeant Eversmann's team is ordered to head east to the crash site and check for survivors, secure a perimeter as they are the closest to the crash site. Meanwhile, the rest of the Rangers will be coming in after a while, and Sergeant Eversmann takes Galantine and Schmidt with him to the crash site, ordering Twombly and Nelson to stay their current perimeter to continue their original mission of surrounding the target building. At the evacuation site, Colonel Steele assigns McKnight to secure the perimeter where the prisoners are being held, load them onto the Humvees, and meet Steele at the crash site once the Humvees arrive. The colonel takes most of the Delta Assault Team soldiers along with the rest of the Ranger personnel with him to the crash site. However, a convoy that was supposed to take Twombly and Nelson from their perimeters seems to have forgotten them and left. Regardless, they show character by staying at the sites they were assigned, as they seem to be left behind. Suddenly, a group of locals approach the Black Hawk crash site, and one of the soldiers crumbles out of the crashed helicopter, trying to shoot the approaching personnel away as he desperately awaits for reinforcements. However, the reinforcements face a hostile heavy fire on their way as shooting rains the scene. Meanwhile, 3 Humvees taking the casualty Blackburn to the camp arrive at the camp as medics frantically take him in. Finally, the Chalk Team 4 under Sergeant Eversmann and one of the evac choppers arrive at the Black Hawk crash site. They find 2 pilots dead while the 2 crew chiefs are wounded. The chief, who was trying to shoot off the approaching locals, is heavily injured, and the helicopter that just landed leaves, taking him on board as his case is an emergency. As the rest of the Rangers team arrive, they radio Colonel Steele, who's under heavy fire, asking him for medevac for the rest of the wounded Black Hawk chopper personnel. The colonel turns down the request, pronouncing the area too hot for a bird to land. The team must secure the perimeter first before the medevac can come to their help. As the team under Colonel Steele goes to the crash site, they face strong enemy resistance. They get shot down by an enemy RPG, and one of the soldiers gets killed after literally being cut in half by the RPG's impact, while the other gets shot by a militia from the back. After getting the signal that they're just 200 meters out from the crash site by the choppers overhead, the Humvees with Colonel Steele's personnel desperately head that way. In the midst of all this, Twombly and Nelson, after discovering that the Humvees will not come their way, start to head to the crash site. Most of the team regroups at the crash site and checks in for the Black Hawk chiefs and personnel. They decide to stabilize them inside the crash site, as carrying them away can be lethal. As pilot Durant, flying Super 6-4's helicopter, tries to cover the empty spot left by the crashed Black Hawk, it gets shot down by a hostile RPG. The team with Colonel Steele start to receive heavy fire and almost get pinned down, with some soldiers getting shot. Then, the colonel and the Assault Delta Team officer, Sergeant Sanders, get into an argument as Sergeant Sanders starts to give orders that he shouldn't have. After the argument conceals, the colonel orders Grimes, who is also a member of the Chalk 4, to hook up with the Deltas and to head to the crash site to join with Sergeant Eversmann, as the rest secure the building that they're at and treat the wounded as they wait for the convoy. Meanwhile, the team under Sergeant Strucker that transported the casualty Blackburn back to the camp is called back in. They gear up, maximize their ammo and grenades, and they head back to the scene, adding even more personnel from the camp. Then, the next scene shows the left-behind pair Twombly and Nelson meeting with York, and they start heading to the crash site together. Suddenly, a crowd of locals, numbering in the hundreds, starts advancing towards the second crash site. Processing the circumstances, Sugart and Gordon, who were hovering over the crash site, request permission from General Garrison to go down and secure the perimeter until the convoy arrives. The general gives the power of the call to Colonel Harrell, who then grants permission as the chopper goes down to land the pair. The scene then shifts to the evacuation team under Colonel McKnight as they load up the prisoners onto the convoy and start to drive away back to the camp instead of going to evac Sergeant Eversmann's team. And they're allowed to do so because the driver is shot and they have many people wounded. They leave the team under Sergeant Eversmann all by themselves to protect the strong point until the next convoy arrives. Upon hearing the news that the evac team has headed back home, Sergeant Eversmann informs his team to conserve their ammo and protect the site as they desperately wait for the next convoy to be sent their way. The situation is getting worse by the minute. At the second crash site, the locals, armed to the teeth, close in on the downed chopper, shooting at the pilot Durant as he tries to protect the aircraft. Sugart and Gordon Gordon arrive just in time to help, fighting off the attackers as they try to secure the perimeter. But the fight takes a tragic turn when Gordon gets shot and killed, leaving only Durant and Sugar to fend for themselves. They get pinned down and Sugar is killed by the angry mob, and the locals undress his military uniform and celebrate with his body. However, just as they were about to do the same to Durant, one of the militias stops them, saying that Adid wants the pilot alive. Back in the control center, General Garrison orders everything they have to head to the hostile zone and rescue their team. Meanwhile, the evac team under McKnight carrying the prisoners gets back to the camp safely as the medics work on the wounded. In the next scene, Sergeant Struker's team tries to get close to the crash site, but they encounter numerous roadblocks. They park their Humvees and continue on foot, arriving at the crash site to find only a helmet. They bomb the second crashed helicopter and move on to join Sergeant Eversmann's team. Around midnight, Sergeant Sanders' team meets up with Sergeant Eversmann's team, and the trio of York, Twombly, and Nelson also join them after a firefight with the enemy. Corporal Smith from Eversmann's team gets shot while trying to save Twombly. Eversmann calls Captain Steele to request medevac, but the Commander-in-Chief Commander General Garrison turns down the request, deeming it too risky to land a chopper in the hot zone. Back in the command center, Lieutenant Colonel Cribbs calls General Garrison from the Pakistani stadium to inform him that the Pakistani forces need at least 2 hours to mobilize their troops. However, the general disagrees, saying that the help is needed right now. As the night wears on, more of Adid's militias find the American stronghold where Sergeant Eversmann and Sergeant Sanders' team are held up, and they start shooting heavy weaponry towards their building. The Delta team, led by Di Tommaso, arrive just in time to take out the men operating the heavy weapons, saving Eversmann and Sanders' team. In the control center, General Garrison orders ground personnel to mark target positions with infrared strobes, preparing them for an airstrike. They also get little birds on strafing runs, determined to regain control of the city at all costs. Meanwhile, in the Pakistani stadium, Lieutenant Colonel Cribbs manages to gather enough men from the UN and the 10th Mountain to provide the much-needed help for the Americans. They head to the fighting centers around midnight to join the fight. At Sergeant Eversmann and Sergeant Sanders' location, tragedy strikes as Corporal Smith from Eversmann's team dies from a gunshot wound he received while trying to save Twombly earlier in the movie. Sergeant Struker confronts Sergeant Eversmann, telling him that he did the right thing and that he can't control everything that happens. Their conversation, though, is interrupted by the sound of a friendly chopper hovering above them. The chopper couldn't identify friend from foe due to the chaotic situation below them. So, Sergeant Eversmann heroically moves amid enemy fire to place an infrared strobe, hoping it would help the chopper locate their position. After a failed attempt at first, he succeeds in placing the strobe on the roof, and the helicopter rains heavy bullets on the rooftop to eliminate the militia there. Colonel McKnight's rescue evac convoy, aided by the UN and the 10th Mountain, arrive on the scene and rescue Captain Steele's team. Steele radios Sergeant Eversmann to inform his exhausted team that the evac convoy is coming in 5 minutes. Despite being low on ammo, Eversmann's team continue to fight and take enemy fire as the agonizing 5 minutes count down. Finally, after 2:05 in midnight, the convoy arrives as the team begins their refill. They even manage to crack the cockpit of the crashed helicopter as General Garrison orders the evac team not to leave anybody behind. But extracting the bodies of Cliff Wolcott and his co-pilot from the downed Black Hawk proves to be more of a complicated process, and the convoy is forced to stay for nearly 4 more hours. Finally, around early in the morning, they begin to leave the scene. As the Humvees and trucks get filled, the team of Sergeant Eversmann and Sergeant Struker and Sergeant Sanders run all the way back, and along their way, they receive cheers and support from the locals in the safe zone, marking the end of the movie. In the movie's ending titles, it's revealed that the pilot Durant was released after 11 days of captivity after President Bill Clinton withdrew all the US forces from Somalia. During the raid, 19 American soldiers and more than 1,000 Somalis died, with around 73 American soldiers wounded. Delta snipers Gordon and Sugart were awarded the Medal of Honor. General Garrison accepted full responsibility for the outcome of the raid, and on August 2, the warlord Muhammad Farah Adid was killed in Mogadishu, and General Garrison retired the following day. And that is how our movie comes to its conclusion. I hope you guys enjoyed our recaps. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and most of all, leave us a comment because we love hearing from you guys. We'll see you on our next recap. Love you all. Bye.